I think I speak for all of us when I say like we all learn from the newbies as well, because like there's a bunch of stuff that I take as like granted or as like assumptions with like patterns of data, and like sometimes newbies will come in and be like, oh, actually, like this contract is a new contract. Why do they do their token like this? And I'll be like, oh, I guess like that's a pattern I assumed wouldn't change, and it did change. And so like it's always helpful to basically have new people coming in, bringing in fresh perspective, pointing out changes that like I just like wouldn't see otherwise.
Welcome to the Deus Ex Down podcast.
Welcome everybody to another Deus Ex Down podcast. And in this episode, we're going to chat with Andrew Hong, also known as Ilemi. And he is like the main data wizard at Dune. So we're going to chat about like building a data community around Dune itself, but also growing his new data community called Byte Explorers. But before we kick it off, welcome Andrew, and maybe you can introduce yourself and like how you came to be a Dune hat wizard.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be here. It's been an awesome pod to listen to so far. Yeah, my path into becoming a headmaster was I guess as non-traditional as almost all crypto crypto full-time employees are. I started out more on the banking side after college. Thought I wanted to be a mortgage-backed securities kind of trader. And then after about 2 years, I decided this is not the path I want. Like if you work in finance, you deal with a lot more legal and like political BS than you do actual like fun work. So COVID hit. I had a bunch of free time because the bank I worked at could not figure out their remote tech. And that was 2020 spring. DeFi summer basically was just kicking off. I ended up getting in touch with some ETH Global people who were just like, hey, we have like 300K in bounties for these hackathons. Just come hack with us. And it was literally at that time, like maybe only 50 or 60 people participating in the hackathons. So if you submitted anything, you would win like 3 to 5K. And I was like, okay, this is like basically free money for like people also just like one on one teaching me how to like teaching me how to write Solidity, teaching me how to write JavaScript. So like that's actually how I got into the space. I did a bunch of like Solidity freelancing. I was by no means a good Solidity developer, but that taught me like a lot about like the low level workings of Ethereum, which I think then helped after I decided I didn't want to do Solidity, and I started freelancing as like a Dune analyst about I guess 6 7 months later. This is like now spring 2021. I've already been in the space for a year. Um, and airdrops becoming bigger. There's this company called Mir.xyz. They had a right token. They were thinking about doing a right token airdrop. I helped them design an airdrop using like Dune Analytics as well as like some graph data analysis on the side. And then joined Mir full time. At that time, I was already writing a bunch of like Dune slash data blogs because like there was no material in the space. Like anyone who's a data analyst in Web 2, like search any topic and then you put towards data science medium and like there are a bunch of articles that can help you get started. But for crypto, like if you tried doing that back in 2021, like crickets, like nothing. You might get one article explaining like, oh, here's how a state tree works, or here's how a storage tree works, or like events are just Bloom filters, but it's like all nonsense for like a data analyst who's like not super technical into the space. So that's why I started writing because I was just like, all right, someone needs to document this, otherwise no one's gonna be able to learn this. So doing that while at Mir, while also still freelancing, and then by end of 2021, or I guess by end of 2022, I decided, all right, I've been doing a lot of Dune stuff. Dune is looking for someone to help lead the community more. And I made the hop over to Dune. Um, yeah, late 2022, and been here ever since. Leading education, covering more than just Ethereum now. I've done articles and dashboards and stuff across Bitcoin, across Solana. Just trying to, help everyone better understand like data in the space and get more people into our industry. Basically is my goal.
And that's certainly working. I think I used a lot of like your tutorials, whether they were in video form or Substack form, to understand June better. And I think I can recommend like anybody who wants to learn June, or like work with some kind of SQL language to blockchain, to start with that, because it covers simple queries, but also more complex.
For
And
sure.
even if you don't want to be, I think, a June analyst, you just understand the tech better through that. Especially
100%.
as you said, like most written content is for programmers, but not for data
Yeah.
analysts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And somebody speaking to you in your own language that
Yep.
is great. So that's I think the start of building a community, right? Like communicating what you can do
Yep.
with the tooling, but also like people helping each other without them actually being associated with you, just so because they want to see cool stuff being built, like cool dashboards, cool query, understand the space a little bit better. For me, I think that's one of the key features why June is a success, because it's like an open source tool, and there's a lot of people who can fork the code, who can write about it, and basically improve through that community. Is that also your interpretation, like why June is a success and why it's now such a household name, and everybody just looking for June dashboards whenever they want more information on a project?
Yeah. I mean, like looking back, I think it's easy to like retroactively fit a narrative of like, yes, this thing we did is what drove a community. I think Dune's always been focused on two things. One is obviously having like the easiest to work with data, like being the first to have Ethereum decoding, being the first to have Solana decoding, um, being the first to have spells, basically like dex trades. That's always been like one of our top priorities. And the other one on the more community side is like just being very disciplined and good at finding people who are able to bring in more people. Right. It's like put differently, like I consciously put more effort into like even one-on-one teaching someone if they give me the vibes that they're someone who's going to bring in a friend. Right. If someone comes to me and they're very clearly just like bounty chasing and not really looking to like improve the ecosystem, I'll still help them, but like I honestly don't help them as much. And like that's a conscious trade-off that I've made, that I've told teammates to make. And like we've kind of like, it's not like we have a framework or like grading system, but like we kind of have a good like soft filter for like, okay, this person's up and coming, they've got the right ethos. We're going to spend more time like boosting them, teaching them, getting them into our community, getting them connected. Um and like those are literally the three steps we go through of like, okay, boost them with our Dune Twitter and like with our own Twitter accounts, like teach them like, hey, here's how you can improve your queries, or like here's what teams are actually curious about past TVL. And then like getting them into our communities. Like we have like many different group chats for different topics or like different levels of and we'll just bring them in and be like, hey, this person's up and coming, like go chat with them, and just continually doing that one by one. Like it doesn't scale per se, but like if you bring in one person who brings in one person who brings in one person, like you eventually hit like this power law. And like we've already seen that actually looking at like internal data. So
That's cool. Analyzing your own data to see how the network is
yeah, of
expanding.
course. Yeah.
I think there was a very important moment, I think last year, where you were always like the top creator on June, but you had to give away that spot, right? Like, could you tell
I
a bit about
yeah.
that moment? Because I think that was actually a super important moment, actually proves that you were successful in what you were doing. But maybe you
For
can
sure.
help from your perspective.
Yeah, I was never the top creator. I think our founder was Hagatek. He's on there. He created one big dashboard, and that's been his contribution. And yeah, last year we had Hildeby kind of take over the top of the leaderboard. I think we had Richard Chen before that actually. I mean, yeah, it's great to see just like if you look at the Dune leaderboard, I think like there are a bunch of Dune employees that do create on there, but like we're not the top creators on Dune, by stars at least. And I think you're right. It is a testament to the fact that like there are people who are just able to create dashboards and data that really connect with communities that like I don't talk to on a day to day, right? Like they're in there in the discords, really understanding like, oh yeah, this community really wants to see this metric tracked or these wallets tracked, and they'll go do it and they'll like move up our leaderboard. And it's like completely organic. It does feel good to see, and that is one of the ways we look at the power law. It's like we can look at a metric where it's like how many days does it take to get a wizard to 100 stars? For example, like that's one thing we saw of like if you think of a learning curve of like how many stars a wizard gets over a lifetime, it used to be like, oh, it takes 300 days to get to 100 stars. Or at some point, it was like 500 days for like the early wizards, like 2019, 2020 wizards, basically. And like that's shortened down to like, if you're good, like 60 days or 30 days is even enough now to get to 100 stars, which really shows like the network effects of the platform. So that viewpoint is actually something we look at more than just like who's at the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah, because I think the stars not only show the appreciation for the creators, but also just the community
Yep,
looking more and more into these dashboards and appreciating what they do.
totally.
Um, I think maybe we can go a little bit deeper into June and the role of basically crowdsourcing that analysis, because June is being helped massively by these creators, because they
Yep,
also not only create dashboard, but they also create queries that create more tables in June, like more pre-processing inside of June.
yep,
um, I think like that's also one of the strengths, that you outsourced some of the opinion of like how this data should look and like what data
yep.
sources should standard be available. What's the process there? Like who gets to decide what new tables get added, and how does the community help with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's very complex. There's really only I feel like two repos in the ecosystem that have done this well, I think. One is Dune Spellbook, obviously, and then the other is like DeFillama adapters. And like I was checking out the stats from each, and like the stats are like fairly well aligned in terms of like both of our repos see about 1,000 files change or get added a month. We both see basically like of those 1,000 files, like 200 or so of those are like new protocols or like new tables, basically. It comes from like roughly 40 or something contributors. And they're different contributors. Like DeFi Llama has a different set of contributors than we do. But I think it speaks to the ecosystem in terms of like that kind of growth stat is the same. And if you've worked with data before, like if you haven't worked with data, you might be like, oh, 1,000 files or 200 models, like I don't know. Is that a lot or a little? I'm going to tell you right now, that's a ton of data to work with. And that means that from Dune's perspective, we only have enough time to really make sure the models run and don't error out. We don't really have time to be setting standards. And I think like DeFi Llama is kind of in the same boat. They set some standards around like what they count as TVL or not. But other than that, it's like, it's very hard to set some sort of standard for like even like this is what a dex swap is. Even something like that's hard because you might get a new kind of dex like Nocturne that's like a ZK dex where you don't have traders, you just trade like UTXOs basically. And it's like, okay, this doesn't fit into like the one token in, one token out standard we're used to from Uniswap, or you have Curve that's like they swap like every swap could be two swaps because it's swapping one curve pool then swapping the base pool. So it's like I think a lot like Dune gets a lot of requests actually to be like, hey, can you guys come out with some sort of standards? And it's just like honestly, it's like there's no way for like crypto at this moment and how quickly things grow to like throw standards on top. We're literally just like fighting to stay on top of all of the work the community is doing. And like we're not even really pushing the community to do it. They're just like they need to put things in there because it's like heavy compute that can't be done through like normal queries in Dune. So they're just like, I want this in there to unblock my workflow, and that's it. They're in, they're out, they're in, they're out, you know. So it's hard to say that like we've done something specific there besides just like try to stay out of their like we try not to block them basically. And that's like our ongoing strategy.
Yeah, and I think in the last episode I did with the indexing company, we talked also about the standardization. Like, do we need that? Is that
Right.
possible?
Yeah.
It's really hard. Like the space is way too early to do that.
Yep.
And I think like what you just said is like just let it grow wild. I think it will select it out itself. Like if for more users, like these tables are being recommended more, maybe in articles and videos, and more people will use it, and then it selects itself out. So that's a way of standardization just by seeing how much it is adopted.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would
That's
be,
true.
yeah, I think that would be a fine fine approach. And I think on the other end, like that's I think what good data analysts should do is like view the same data from like different viewpoints. So sometimes
Yep.
we have to look from the wallet perspective, sometimes from the project perspective, and how the data is processed is always in a different way.
Yep.
So maybe you can have like two conflicting opinions on the data in the same database. It's just more of a question like, hey, which table will I then use for my analysis? And
Yep.
I think that's where the conversation, and I think that's awesome also about June dashboards, is that you can add like text and like your comments in there. I actually want to see that being done more, like explanation of like what's really happening. Why did I source this data and not this one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's fair.
but like, yeah, I think that that's something that eventually we'll see more and more. We're just happy that there are people like pre-processing data for us, and like pre-compiling that to so we don't have to do the same work over and over again.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
which I think brings me to one of the critiques I have on June. So hopefully we
Yeah.
can tap into this too. Like, my problem is that like all data like merging, cleaning, and then creating metrics is being done in one query. In your
Mhm.
latest article, which I will link in the show notes, um, you mentioned that that's actually a strength, like putting it all in a single query. And in
Yeah.
some cases it is, in some cases not, it isn't. But maybe we could chat about like the situations that when is it super ideal to just put everything in one query, and in what stage would you say like, hey, I want to pre-process and then use that pre-processed data for like different analysis or like different views, different metrics, and reuse that pre-processing without it having to wait for like all that pre-processing to happen. um Floor is
Yeah.
yours. Why
I
did you
mean,
make that statement?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, easy answer is it depends on the size of your team. If you're a single analyst, like if I'm working by myself, like I very much prefer to just have less queries. Like I want like the assumption here is I'm building something for like analytics or monitoring. I'm not building something for a production app. Like in that case, like it is nice to have a single query where I can aggregate everything from my parameters to the tables, and also have like scheduling and alerts and like everything built into one. I think as like if you're a single analyst working on a team and you don't have like another data engineer or analytics engineer to help you, it's super powerful to be able to do everything in one query. If you're a team of 10 analysts, then yes, I heavily recommend you use our like query as a view and like materialized view features, which is basically like you can build an ETL pipeline of Dune queries, essentially. Yes, at that size, you should definitely be breaking down your queries, and like that's something we do see from a bunch of our teams, like 1inch or Lido or whatnot, who like have their own like. I think some of them track it in a Miro board where they just like literally like link the Dune query and draw like a DAG, which for anyone who doesn't know, they're like a directed graph showing the lineage of a query. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it evolves over time. I'm not like, oh, everything should always be one query, or oh, everything should always be broken down. Because I've like seen on like some teams, like where an analyst kind of falls into the trap of like they think DBT or something's really cool, and they try and break it down into way too many subtables just because it feels cool. And then they kind of like how do I put it? It's like if you give someone a complex surface, like if you reveal the complexity of something, people will always build up to however maximum the complexity can be, even if it could be much simpler. Versus like you force someone into a simple surface, it's actually sometimes better for the user if you force them to work under these simple constraints. That's like been a tried and true, I think, data lesson. But I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's been like my viewpoint on it. So
Well, it does, because I think my opinion on this topic is indeed like different research or different applications need different pipelines. And
yep,
at first, Dune was really that platform where you would write one query, and then that was like the result in a
yeah,
table or in some kind of graph. I think you're moving now more towards like, hey, we can link queries.
yep,
The one
yep,
inch query you mentioned, I worked with that too. Like you link to one
yep,
inch query, and then you
exactly.
can pull the data from there. So it brings a little bit of the responsibility to like the community or like the companies that say like,
Right.
hey, we know this data best. We build some queries for you, and then you can do whatever you want with it. But like
Yep,
this is how we think our data definition should be. And of course, you added features of like, hey, you can also put in your own CSVs as a table, so you can add
yep,
like off-chain data or just data you sourced that is not currently available on June. So
exactly.
I think I'm glad you moved towards like let the user pick that, and
Yeah,
whether the user is one person or a full team. Yeah, I'm glad that development is being done. But it
definitely.
also shows like the community can be of value. Like 1inch is building cool queries. Like
Oh,
I looked
100%.
at that original query, it's insane. Like I
Yep.
couldn't like, build
No,
something like
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
myself.
yeah. No, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. So like linking queries, creating your own tables, I think that's an awesome feature. um, I think we should talk about like your new community.
Sure,
Of
yeah.
course, you've grown the June community, but like I think last week you mentioned, hey, I'm building a new community, and
Yep.
it's called. I think you're presenting yourself as Crypto Data Bytes, and the
Right.
community is called the Byte Explorers. That's correct,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah,
Good.
I'm still figuring out branding, but I figured I would separate the entities since Crypto Data Bytes is just like my newsletter and my writing. Byte Explorers is meant to be not fully standalone, but like a sub entity of it. Yeah, I can talk more about kind of why I created it and why I think it matters. So I think obviously like we work in crypto, but most data or like Dune or Flipside or whatever you use, it doesn't tie into crypto. Like it doesn't actually use crypto for the most part. And I think that's a fairly lost opportunity. Because like the more if you like talk with a lot of platforms in the space, like crypto platforms, not data platforms, be it like layer3.xyz or dwork or like there used to be one called 101.xyz or Bountycaster or Rabbit Hole. Like, if you talk to any of these teams, they'll say, oh, yeah, like Dune bounties are like the first thing we want to see, or like Dune work is the first thing we want to see. Because it's kind of like the most objective. Like, you can tell if someone made a good dashboard or not, you know, and it's fairly objective. So like a lot of our communities, like not just the Dune community, but like data community in general, has participated on all these platforms and like earned different POAPs or earned like won different competitions or completed different bounties. Um, and they might have gotten some crypto tokens in return, but like it's not tracked anywhere. You know, like you can argue, oh yeah, I won this competition and it's got this contract here. But if layer three then decides to pivot like they did out of competitions into like more generic quests, like no one's going to be able to find that contract ever again, basically, unless someone record keeps all of it, which no one is because there's too many startups that are pivoting. So my thought process was like, all right, there's two things that are necessary here. One is like the first one is like it should be the data community choosing how to track like token issuance and reputation. It shouldn't be up to like bounty caster or something to figure out like, oh, this Dune wizard completed a bounty. We should give him like 4 Dune tokens or something for like completing the bounty. Like a lot of these platforms don't have the energy to go and like figure out these minute community like reputation systems. So first thing is that should be controlled by the data community, which is why I built Byte Explorers with the ERC 6551 standard, which is basically you store any number of tokens in an NFT. So essentially, the NFT becomes like if you think of it as like you have a passport, and when you travel, you get stamps in the passport that you collect that shows where you travel to. It's kind of the same idea. You have a passport called a byte pass. Anyone can mint it. And as you complete different quests and like the community comes together to agree on like what should be considered a quest and what should be minted, a stamp basically. As you complete quests, you earn it. You earn tokens. And then it becomes really easy for anyone inside or outside the community to see like, oh, hey, like what has this person done? Like data wise, and you can see, oh, they have this many tokens, they earned it from these platforms, they've been part of this data community for XYZ times. um and it becomes a great way to build up reputation that's like not tied to a specific data platform and also not tied to how like a bounty platform might want to decide reputation. um so that's like one of the big unlocks. And the second one is really like, I think that a lot of platforms that exist expect you to bring your own token, BYOT. Like if you look at Jokers or even Metrics DAO, or like any governance platform, or like Hats Protocol, they're all like, hey, or Guild even, like they expect you to bring a token and then tie some action to it. And currently, like there isn't a token that's easy to tie the data community together with. So like if like Dune wanted to host like a data competition where it was like token gated to just data contributors because they don't want it to get sibbled, for example, they have no way of like pulling all like, I don't know, like good wizards or something. Especially like other people often, like you might have Shadow who's like, hey, we want product feedback. We'll use Dform to survey the data community to get like, and like we'll put incentives with it. Like if you fill out this form, we'll pay you 100 USDC. You know, like they don't have a token that they can just call and import data community, basically. So, anyways, that's long-winded, but those are the two problems I'm trying to solve with this community. It's called the Byte Explorers. We're already 106 people after a week, and anyone at any skill level can join. So,
Yeah, and I think such a reputation system from the data community itself, like where they can judge each other's work, but also I think I see in the group that there is a lot of like peer review, like people are sharing work,
yep,
commenting, asking questions to each other. I think that's beautiful to see, because I think that's my opinion on like data analysis, is that it's a never-ending work. So you have to like iterate, and that's because the world keeps changing, like the on-chain world keeps changing, but also because you can probably improve something and somebody else can give you an idea of how your metric can be better presented, for
100%.
example. So the problem is like your work is never done, but it's a good thing because you keep learning, and sometimes your project is finished, But I think before that happens, there's probably a few steps and iterations over your product, and such a community can definitely help with that. And it's also good to see that there's like people who just started, like the first
Yep.
queries, and people in there who, are like top Dune wizards that create like the
Yeah.
best dashboards. But yeah, I feel that's not a problem to them, like being with the newbies,
Oh yeah.
because
Yeah.
they've
They're
been
good
one
people.
too. Like,
Yep.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, and
Uh,
I think I speak for all of us when I say like we all learn from the newbies as well, because like there's a bunch of stuff that I take as like granted or as like assumptions with like patterns of data, and like sometimes newbies will come in and be like, oh, actually, like this contract is a new contract. Why do they do their token like this? And I'll be like, oh, I guess like that's a pattern I assumed wouldn't change, and it did change. And so like it's always helpful to basically have new people coming in, bringing in fresh perspective, pointing out changes that like I just like wouldn't see otherwise. Yeah, it's a great time.
yeah, you can get stuck in these habits, like
For sure.
your
Yeah,
own platforms you like to work with, but also like tables you want to call or
exactly.
products you
Exactly.
work with. So
Yeah.
I think that helps. And I think it's also great that even though you're working for June, you actually allow like any analysis or any dashboard or any
Yep.
language or data source in here,
Yep.
right? Like that's really showing that you want to be agnostic, and just want to have a good data community instead
Yep.
of like best people for this single tool.
100%. Yeah, and we want to. I think there's like, I was talking about this on the Twitter space on Wednesday, but like, a lot of analysts just sit in the query layer, but there's a ton you can learn from better understanding the indexing layer. And like, same thing. Like, I think a lot of indexers, like data engineers, kind of get stuck because they're like, oh, what do I do after I build out balances? Like, there's kind of nothing else to do. And it's like, well, no, if you look at what analysts on the query layer are actually building, you'll get a much better intuition for like what tables you might want to build at a data engineering level. So I think like this kind of like cross pollination is just like really healthy overall for the ecosystem. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are like different groups. Like you have these data engineers who really work with the raw data, create
Yep.
like more structured data for the analysts to work with. But even like past that, you have like people who build the dashboards. But I think there's also a type of analyst who just needs these good dashboards and is maybe super good in interpreting that data and like
Correct. Yep. Yep.
converting that to what does that mean for crypto, what does that mean for this project, what does that mean for this ecosystem, and those are like all different analysts or like data engineers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think eventually you could describe yourself more in one of those roles, but all of them work on understanding the space better, like
Yep.
what's really happening.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
is there anything about that, like right now there's, you're testing the community, it's early, you're giving out the first points, people come in,
Yep.
they submit some of their previous work.
Yep.
um, what's next on the roadmap for the community, and how are you how do you want to build out this basically reputation system or reward system?
Yep.
um,
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my main lesson from watching a bunch of communities get built and like either go stagnant or like lose traction over time has just been like a lot of communities get way too complex way too quickly. Like I'll be honest, like I love the metric style people. I think that their white paper was a little overly complex. I appreciate the ambition of it, but I think like for a community, the longer you can keep things simple, the better. Which is why I'm literally just keeping it as like there's one quest we do. It's a weekly quest that doesn't change. It's literally just share your work. I want you to get in the habit of like whatever you built that week, just submit it. Like there's no pressure. It's not a competition. You'll get feedback. You'll learn from it, and you'll earn points. And like the points don't mean anything right now. They're not transferable. They're not tradable. There's no money involved. you get like a cute badge that you can kind of share around and like look at as you move up in tiers. And that's it. And like I really want to keep it simple for at least a month, until we get like maybe 10 people at like a higher tier, or I think I'm calling it the Trailblazer tier. And at that point, I'll be like, okay, let's now take the same quest and introduce a community voting dynamic. So now, like, if you have the Trailblazer tier, I'll give you 500 votes that you can allocate yourself, essentially. But the main interaction doesn't change. So it's kind of like add a platform, add a commute. Like if you think of it as like this first quest, we added the quest, I controlled the voting, and then we add the community interaction on top of the community can vote. And then after we get used to the community voting, I'm probably going to add something like attestations where it's like, okay, I want some way of not just rewarding the people who had the best, like who submitted good work, but also I want to be able to reward the voters and the relationships being built. I think attestations are a good angle. So I'll add that and just let it sit for like 3 weeks until people kind of learn, get an appreciation for it. Um, and then I think basically the long term view is like that pattern of like add a base reward and interaction that's like controlled by a very limited set, open up the set, and then add an attestation on top of the set is something we'll probably then repeat for like another platform like Bounty Caster, where it's like very simple. Like I might build like a byte bot where when you finish a Dune or like a data bounty, you tag Bytebot and say, "Hey, I finished this bounty," and then I might just at the start be like, "Okay, I personally will approve if I think this bounty was worthy or not. If it was worthy, you get 1 guild token per $100 of like bounty revenue." You know, and then slowly open that up, slowly add attestations on top of that. But like the key theme here is like take it slow. It should always be simple. Like people shouldn't have to come in and understand like 10 different dynamics or 10 different tokens. Like when you look at the guild, like when you look at your byte pass, it should always be, oh, there's a name, there's the tier, and then there's like 3 token counters. And like it's not crazy, you know. So that's the vision for now. So
Yeah, that's definitely cool. And the chat is like super active.
yeah,
Everybody's
lots of great people.
yeah, and everybody's submitting their work, whether that's like from last week or previous work. I
Yep,
think that's
yep.
also good that you allow previous work because that's like people's introduction. Like, hey, this is my best
Exactly.
stuff
Yeah,
I
like
did.
show off what you're proud of.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Build a small CV and collect it in one NFT basically and
Exactly. Yeah.
scoring system.
Yeah. Yeah.
True. Well, it's good that something like this is being built and people can support each other. I think I have like maybe a more philosophical question about like how you see the data space evolve. I mentioned you put out the 2024 annual guide on like what's the
Yes. Yeah.
status now.
Yeah.
Um, what like tools or systems do you want to see build, or what type of dashboards do you want to see build in the
Mm,
next year or the next 2 years that will help analysts or people interpreting the data?
yep.
um, yeah, like where we have good tooling has definitely improved, the tech has improved.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Yeah. I would say one of the things that I think the ecosystem as a whole needs to improve on is definitely labels. Like something as simple as just like labeling all contracts as like this is a DEX contract. This was a pool deployed by XYZ person. Um, like I think you can think of it as like there's 3 types of labels. There's address labels, there's transaction labels, and there's contract labels. And you might we'll get into like address and contract, like contracts are addresses, but we'll get into that. But I think it's like let's break down like a Uniswap just in time like JIT liquidity swap. For those who don't know, the idea of just in time liquidity is the idea that when I go make a swap on Uniswap, someone will add liquidity at the time of the swap and then remove the liquidity right after the swap. So it's kind of like your swap gets sandwiched, and you actually do get better pricing, and someone else will earn basically all the fees of that swap. It's a little confusing. You don't have to fully understand it, but the idea here is that there are three actions that were taken. There was add liquidity, there was swap, and there was remove liquidity, right? So something you would want to be able to say is, okay, I want to have like all of the add liquidity, remove liquidity actions, like the function signatures, labeled as liquidity functions. And then if I see a pattern of both like liquidity functions and swap functions used in the same transaction, I'm going to now label that transaction as a just-in-time liquidity swap. You know, so you start to build up this intuition of what's happening at the function call level and what combinations of functions mean different things. And some of that has to be manually labeled. Some of that could be through like clustering and aggregations of just like what are the most common combinations of functions and orders, and like which ones have we not labeled, and kind of just go through it manually from there. Obviously, it then helps to then have contracts labeled so you know like what functions are commonly involved with what contracts. I think that's like can become really helpful in this space because, like, if you think about it, right now, if I drop you like drop a new user into Dune and have them query Uniswap, they'll probably go find the Uniswap decoded table for event swap, and they go and query that, and they have no idea what's related to that. You know, they don't know that there's a positions manager contract. They don't know really how the positions are tracked. They don't know that there's aggregators on top. That's all context that's missing. So there has to be some easy way for the user to be like, okay, this was a swap on Uniswap. What are the common functions that maybe I should look into that are on Uniswap? Or what are the functions that are common on DEXs that Uniswap actually doesn't enable? You know, I think it has to be easier for a user to navigate that both at the query level and at the explorer level. I think like onceupon.gg is trying. They have like a context repo, I think is what they're calling it, to do some of this function labeling. But I don't think like I think Nansen has gotten the farthest with like wallet labeling per se. But I think there's like still so much that can be done there that helps link the data space together, and it helps everyone across the whole stack if we can do this correctly. So that's something I'm really excited to see done better. The other big one is definitely like RPC improvements. I think we're slowly going to move away from the RPC in terms of like how to get data. Like you already see this with like how the Graph or like Gold Sky are doing things in terms of like, oh, it's not realistic to transform like block by block RPC calls. Someone please go and dump all of these RPC calls into some like BigQuery table so that we can just stream the table instead. You know, and I see the same thing when I look at like Shadow. Like, sure, their main thing is like they give you a forked RPC, but I'm sure they'll also offer like, hey, if you want this RPC data in a different format, we'll offer that to you too. You know, like there's no reason that our data engineering stack has to rely on getting data from RPCs unless you're like a front end that needs that like, I guess like low risk component. But everyone else, like there has to be kind of this like between RPC and Dune layer of like raw data. So I think we'll see that come out probably, honestly, I think from like rollup as a service providers. Because you can imagine like Conduit or Astria, they have 1,000 rollups. Like Dune is not going to integrate 1,000 RPCs. But if you had a table that aggregated the data from all these RPCs, essentially, where I could like select all from chain and just get that into Dune, that's realistic to integrate, you know? And like, I think that then causes meaningful differences in like how Dune defines schemas per se downstream. So it's very long winded, but again, the two things are labels, and evolutions from RPCs, essentially.
That's both good points. I think labels is definitely one that I'm interested in too. The funny thing is that when I learned that not all, like, the thing is with blockchain data is the idea is you can verify that yourself. But
Yep.
if you look at the raw blockchain data, there's a lot of information missing.
Yep.
You still
Yep.
need to know, like, whose contract is this? Like, it's a Uniswap contract, and like, what do these functions do, like, together? And you could, like, try to figure that out with all the raw blockchain data, but that
Yep.
will take you a very long time. If somebody just told you, like, hey, these three contracts, they work well together, and if
Exactly.
these all fire off in a single transaction, it's probably this kind of transaction, right? Like,
Exactly.
and that's what I'm feeling, that we hopefully we will see projects do more. And I think
Yep.
that's another question for you, like, whose responsibility will this be, or like, um, who benefits the most if they would put these
If they build
labels
it
out?
well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
I
build
mean,
it.
I mean, transparently, like that is something that I'm pushing for us to build. We are working on it. Like if you're listening to this and it's something you're interested, like like if you feel like, oh shit, this is a data set I want, or like, oh, I've already built part of this myself, and you want to work together, just reach out to me on Twitter. More than happy to get you involved in our work streams. Again, all of this is being done in Spellbook. It's public code. It's not like I am hiding any of this. Like this is not a dig at Nansen, but like we are building a public labels data set. We're not building like a. I think if you have private, there are limitations to how quickly it can grow and how quickly it can keep track of things. If you have a publicly, it's much easier for you people to understand to contribute on top of. So, um, if you're interested, reach out to me.
Yeah. We'll put all the details also in the
Yeah, for
notes.
sure. Yeah,
But that's, I think, what will benefit, right? Even if June has a table with some of these good labels that is verified by the community, is open source, then even like other data companies could just reuse that, like query
exactly.
June, add that to their data, combine that, and maybe they have some insights and put in more labels back into
Yep,
June.
that's the vision. That's the
Yeah,
hope.
yeah. I definitely can see that happen, and some good collaborations on that.
Yep, yep,
Um, I and then on the RPC part, yeah, I think that's really, yeah. We don't have to look at all the raw data. We need some layer on top that makes it a little bit more structured. Um,
yep,
and you don't have to call, like, the whole history of the chain every time. Like,
yeah,
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 you can just take that data, because indexing the whole chain, it takes like hours to days,
yep,
depending on the
exactly.
chain. So
Yeah,
yeah, definitely something that can be outsourced to others,
yep,
and hopefully in a well trusted way, or in a verifiable way. But we'll
yeah,
see that happen.
yeah, yeah. Agreed, agreed.
Awesome. I think we're almost at the end of the podcast. I would still like to hear from you. Like, if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that, and how can
Yep.
they learn more about June and crypto data bytes and
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
community?
I mean, I try to respond to almost everyone who reaches out to me through Twitter DMs. So sure, my Twitter will be linked, but it's Andrew Hong 5297. Just find me on Twitter. If you click in the link in bio, you'll see a bunch of starter articles. I run a newsletter that has almost 60 guides now across different chains, for all different levels of analysts. And I mean, obviously, I'm shilling my own community now, but I highly recommend you join the Byte Explorers. There's a lot of good momentum and energy there. If you're trying to learn blockchain data, it is always more fun and easier to learn with the community than it is to learn it yourself. If you're trying to bang your head on the wall studying 1 inch queries on your own in a corner, I guarantee you're gonna have a bad time. But if you share your work, if you connect with the communities on Twitter, on Telegram, you're just gonna have a much easier time onboarding, and your work is gonna be like shared with many more people. So that's that's it for me.
Cool. Yeah, like, the wall definitely has a hole in there, because I tried to figure out how those queries work.
Yes,
So I'm happy to be also in the community.
for
You'll
sure.
see me in there too. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on. It was great having you and hearing your views. And hopefully, people will hear much more from your work, Either that's in June or in the Explorers. We'll see that happen. Thank you for
Definitely.
coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deus Ex DAO podcast, a place where some of the most progressive and innovative builders, thought leaders, and traders in the crypto space come together to discuss all areas of the crypto industry. Whether you're into DeFi, Layer 1s, Layer 2s, NFTs, or anything in between, we've got you covered. And as a reminder, nothing said on this podcast should be construed as financial advice or as a solicitation to buy or sell any digital asset or security. The comments, views, and opinions expressed by the hosts or guests on the podcast are their own. As always, you'll need to do your own research.